The era of free money has come to an end and may not return for a long time, putting severe pressure on consumers, businesses, financial markets, and putting sectors that developed during this time at risk of disappearing. Is this the case of Bitcoin? In the years following the Great Recession, the world's central banks flooded their economies with money, with low interest rates and a strong incentive to spend and invest in what has been called the era of free money, referring to how extremely cheap and easy it was for people and companies to take loans. Despite this, inflation, in its traditional measure, did not rise and remained low and forgotten in the economic discussion in developed countries and even in many non-developed countries that maintained rational monetary policies. Being replaced by an eternal discussion around, are we in a bubble? Because the money created fueled sharp price increases in traditional investments like bonds, stocks, and real estate, as well as allowing companies that lost money for years and were known for using large amounts of capital to get ahead, as was the case with Tesla, Netflix, or Uber, and as it seemed to be the intention of Zuckerberg with the metaverse, until non-virtual reality hit. And in this era of abundant money, Bitcoin appeared, which, absorbing a part of the money created, managed to attract the attention of developers, investors, and speculators who created an entire ecosystem as close to the original idea as this to art. Because, like the dot-com bubble, it ended up attracting a speculative frenzy that had little or nothing to do with its initial intention to give everyone with a cell phone access to the financial world, and places where central banks had abused money printing and made bills worth less than the paper they were made of. And crypto assets like this one were sold for $23.7 million. This one for $29 million, and this one for $69.3 million. While this collection of monkeys has, even after having lost more than 2/3 of its price, a value of $860 million, and the strong rise that practically all crypto assets experienced at some point, added to the ease of borrowing money at much lower rates than the profitability that these assets had been delivering, ended up generating the vicious circle that has been formed in all bubbles so far and will probably continue to show up in all of them because humans don't learn. And the price went up, it attracted more speculators who caused the price to go up even more and so on. With the capitalization of cryptocurrencies reaching over $2.9 trillion at its peak. But the free money scenario that enabled all this began to come to an end as production could not keep up with the high demand facilitated by cheap credit. And although at first the central banks did not pay attention to inflation and considered it a transitory phenomenon, very soon it became the highest in recent decades, forcing them to act. And the main tool they have for this is to raise interest rates as a way of discouraging demand by individuals and companies until it finds a balance with supply that allows prices to stabilize. A slow process that has led to declines in the stock and real estate markets, much more expensive loans, still high inflation, and, for all this, lower expectations of economic growth for this and next year. And cryptocurrencies have not been immune to this move, losing more than 70% of their market valuation, while Bitcoin, despite being touted as a safe haven, has lost 74%, Ethereum has lost 74%, Potcoin 99%, Putincoin 99%, Bakery Token 97%, and FTX, BlockFi, Celsius Network, Three Arrows Capital, among other exchanges, funds, and lenders failing. And the deleveraging that this market is going through forces people who took on debt to buy cryptocurrencies to sell their positions to pay part of them, and the more the price falls, the more people find that their debts are several times the asset they bought. In a vicious circle that it is not clear when will find its floor, because the central banks have not yet found their ceiling. And although in some places inflation has stopped rising, it still remains too high to stop the contractionary monetary policy. Although markets are crying out for it and central banks often don't make the smartest decisions, this time it looks like at least the majors will do the right thing and keep rates high until inflation subsides and signs that it might come back, stop. One of the ways to look at inflation is from the point of view of production. If there is a large printing of money, which allows for a large demand, prices will go up, But if there is also a large increase in production, then prices will remain stable. And during the last years, one of the great responsible for this increase in production has of course been what has been called the world's factory has gone from being economically irrelevant in the 70s to being responsible for more than 20% of the world's manufacturing today, allowing it to be able to respond to the increased demand caused by low interest rates. But what started to be the problem?
People who have lived through what feels like a never-ending lockdown, now taking their anger to the streets.
COVID continued to affect production in different factories in China, where throughout practically all of 2022 industrial activity has contracted, with no solution in sight that allows production to be reestablished in the short term. Adding to another small problem.
Обстоятельства требуют от нас решительных и незамедлительных действий. Мною принято решение о проведении специальной военной операции.
As a way to prove what we are capable of, Russia's invasion of Ukraine has been added to the pandemic and its many consequences. This has directly reduced food production in Ukraine, which is responsible for being the world's largest exporter of sunflower oil, the third largest in barley, the fourth in corn, and the fifth in wheat. In addition, it has caused the United States, Japan, Canada, Singapore, South Korea, and the European Union to sanction Russia, one of the largest producers and exporters of oil and natural gas in the world, in retaliation for this invasion. And although oil can be obtained from other suppliers, gas is very difficult to replace. On one hand, because it requires infrastructure that is no longer available to transport it, and that takes many years to build, and on the other because the transportable versions, which they are the ones that have helped Europe to mitigate this problem, cost 3 to 5 times more. And natural gas, which is the main raw material for producing fertilizers, has increased notably in price, reducing its use in food production and making the world look expectantly to next year's harvests, which could be much less than those of this year and continue causing the price of food to rise. But obviously natural gas is not only used to produce fertilizer, and Europe, especially Germany, has based a large part of their industry on this fossil fuel. That now that it cannot be delivered at the usual price, even if the war were to end today, it puts German industry, which is dependent on low prices to efficiently operate industries such as aluminum, paper, and chemicals, at enormous risk due to their intensive use of energy, which went from €40 per megawatt in 2019 and 2020 to 380 today. This is how, just at the moment when China, the largest producer and exporter in the world, is going through a complex moment at an industrial level, Germany, the third largest producer and exporter in the world, is also doing so. In the midst of a 2023 that could be characterized by the lowest food production in recent years. And while China could theoretically stop its COVID-0 policies today, and has even shown some signs of easing measures to respond to people's protests, a full opening could still take a couple of months. And this has strengthened a feeling that has been given an enormous boost by the pandemic and the war. The need to diversify supply chains. And while before 2019 the smartest thing was to produce where it was cheapest, many companies have been rethinking this due to the political risks that can cause interruptions in supply chains and have been seeking to diversify their production as a way to mitigate risks and ensure the manufacture of their products. A lesson that Apple is currently receiving with the protests by Foxconn workers in China and which have caused it to consider moving part of its production outside the country. But doing this is not so easy, and companies that have invested billions of dollars in China over several decades to achieve pre-pandemic production levels will not be able to diversify their supply chains overnight. And while everything looks bright on the other side of that mountain, where supply chains will be diversified and you'll be able to have your new iPhone even if Mongolia breaks through the Great Wall and successfully invades China, there's still one small detail: the boomers. The baby boomers are the largest generation of people in history, by size. They are those born between 1946 and 1964, after the aphrodisiac boost at the end of the Second World War. This generation, who can't open a PDF, but can tear apart and reassemble a car, is about to retire and will leave a huge gap in the industry that cannot be replaced in many parts of the world, with the generations that follow being so much smaller. and millennials, who are typically the largest generation in size after the boomers, being younger and with less experience. You cannot replace two 60-year-old German engineers with postgraduate degrees and more than 30 years of experience with a single millennial with 30 years of life. This more notorious situation in some places than others will lend itself to mark a transition period in the industry that will continue to affect inflation on the supply side, with the war and the COVID policy zero still continuing, and making it clear that if central banks lower interest rates very soon, the world in general will have no way of responding to the increased demand that will come from cheaper credit. Before continue, remember to subscribe and share this video if you have found this information useful. And returning to Bitcoin, this raises the question, where will the money come from to counteract the price drop that is being seen in all cryptocurrencies? The answer is that it is not clear. In fact, with money becoming more expensive and companies in the world of crypto going bankrupt, it is more likely that there will be a massive sale of these assets, or rather it will continue, increasing the possibility that the idea of crypto assets will disappear. And while some of the major cryptocurrencies will be able to survive and hold their own, they are unlikely to rise in price in the next few years, with the real sector absorbing most of the money, as long as it remains scarce, which is most likely at the moment. And regardless of the qualities that are attributed to Bitcoin, they are of no use if they do not cause people to exchange their fiat money for this cryptocurrency, and in the new reality everything would indicate that for the moment the opposite will be the case. And when production returns completely to normal, or ideally, and thanks to technological advances, better than normal, and a new era of cheap money without inflation begins, it could be too late for cryptocurrencies to recover the pedestal they had in 2021, and a new asset ends up absorbing this excess money. However, it does not hurt to think of a scenario in which the era of free money can return much faster. In this scenario, the spirit of Mao Zedong is exorcised from Xi Jinping. Boomers must defer retirement to support their millennial children who live with them. Productivity has to have a similar boost to when humanity discovered caffeine. And war in Ukraine has to end today in order to repair Nord Stream and for German industry to survive. Let's call it a Christmas miracle. And do you think that Bitcoin will be able to overcome this stage without going into oblivion? Where will the money come from? Will technology be able to make up for this industry turmoil anytime soon, or will it take years? I would like to know your opinion. See you next time.